Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the bigger picture. We all must take a step back and look at what is happening in Israel and in the Middle East. Israel's very existence is at stake. The war in Gaza is only one front. There are two other fronts, and each one of those fronts can, if pushed, explode into other wars without a moment's warning. Israelis know why they are at war. Israelis understand what they are fighting for. Israelis realize how important it is to fight these fights. For Israelis, the sacrifice they endure are noble. Israelis are battling for their very existence. Ever since the October 7th massacre, much media attention and energy has been spent discussing, dissecting, and decrying the Israeli response to the events of that day. Right now, the international media, and hence eyes around the world, are looking towards the Gazan city of Rafah. Rafah is a city that straddles two sides of a border. Half sits in Egypt and half in Gaza. World leaders are clamoring for a ceasefire. Many are going so far as to threaten Israel, warning the Jewish state not to advance on Rafah so as to spare the civilian population that has been living seeking refuge and harboring within. Know that Rafah is the last stronghold of Hamas. Know, too, that Israel will advance on Rafah when the time is right. For now, Israel is taking it slow, employing small strike forces. They will evacuate as many civilians as want to leave. The more civilians to leave Rafah, the easier it will be for Israel to properly deal with the remaining Hamas battalions holed up in the city and burrowed deep in the tunnels under the city. Rafah plays a crucial role in Israel's war against Hamas. Crucial to Israel's vow to destroy Hamas and to free the hostages abducted on that fateful, awful, tragic day in October. Yes, there are certainly Hamas members and pockets of Hamas terrorists in other places like Gaza City and Khan Yunis, cities where Israel has already been, cities where Israel has effectively concluded their mission. But those remaining Hamas cells are leaderless and statistically insignificant. Once Israel's battle mission in Gaza is nearly at its end, and it's coming close to that, after Rafah is successfully free of Hamas, Israel will have the ability, the luxury, the exclusively focus on and find the hostages wherever they have been squirreled away. But Israel's war will not be over. That's important. Even now, Israel's battle and the energy is shifting from Gaza to Lebanon and Syria on Israel's northern border. Over the next few weeks, tens of thousands of Israeli reservist soldiers, many who returned home only 2 months ago, after serving in Gaza since the beginning of the war, since October, will be called to serve on the northern border, where the threat from terrorist organization Hezbollah is gaining momentum. The backbone of the IDF, these soldiers are extremely talented, well-disciplined, well-trained, and now they are very well battle-hardened. They will be arriving as a show of strength. They will be ready for battle. If necessary, they will go into Lebanon to confront Hezbollah. Of course, a presence will remain in Gaza. Every day rockets are shot from Lebanon and Syria into Israel. Israel responds with missiles from fighter jets or helicopters and ground weapons within seconds of Hezbollah's many attacks. Israel has successfully eliminated both the shooters and the rocket batteries that are shooting at Israel from Lebanon and Syria. Tens of thousands of other Israeli reservists, equally trained and determined, are now being called up to report to the West Bank. The West Bank has generated the tremendous increase in terror activity and rise in Hamas affiliation. Ironically, while Hamas has lost local support in Gaza, with the masses blaming Hamas for the horrific situation in which they must live now in Gaza, West Bank Palestinians see Hamas as heroes confronting Israel. The West Bank is an ideal terrorist launch pad. Israel knows that, and Israel needs to clamp down to prevent the terror from overflowing into mainstream Israel. Almost 4,000 terrorists have been arrested in the West Bank in counter-terror raids since October 7th. Israeli political and military leaders are in agreement, as are the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of Israelis, that the situation can never go back to what it was before October 7th. Most Israelis now understand that Hamas ideology is an extremely powerful elixir that motivates Palestinians to murder as many Jews and Israelis as possible. Hamas and Hamas disciples really want to wipe Israel off the map. It's not a cliche. The Middle East is a tinderbox ready to explode over one misstep. Do not for a moment doubt that Iran is the puppet master. Iran controls Hezbollah. Iran pays Hamas. Iran supports the Houthis. And Iran has two overarching objectives: to dominate the Muslim world and to totally eliminate Israel. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from the Wall Street Journal published on March 11th, 2024. This column is penned by Gerard Baker. A quick and important aside. You may have noticed that I frequently select pieces from the Wall Street Journal, like I'm doing today. While that is true, I also select from the New York Post and pieces from many columns from Israeli media, especially the Jerusalem Post and Ynet, and also some far-flung publications that many people do not have access to. The simple reason is that these are the outlets dealing with issues of import to you and to me in a serious and non-judgmental way. Editors are deluged with submissions on a vast array of topics from people hungry to get their pieces in publications of note. Those editors weed through the collection piled on their desks or on their screens and decide which pieces are important for their readership to read and to grapple with. They deem these columns, the ones we're looking at, that we discuss, to be valuable. They are the same issues that I want you to think about. And I want to show support for the editors for making and what I deem to be important choices. And so today, we have a column titled, What's Behind the Propaganda War Against Israel? Subtitled, The Jewish State Has a Right to Defend Itself. Biden seems to say, but it should stop fighting Hamas in Gaza now. In this important column, Baker asked the big question, why is there such a problem with Israel defending itself? This is how Baker begins. What does Israel have to do to be allowed by the rest of the world to defend itself? The insistent effort by some governments, officials, and much of the media in the United States and Europe to get Jewish state to relent against enemies that actively seek to destroy it gives rise to the suspicion that for many of them, perhaps Israel doesn't deserve the right to exist at all. Fortunately, Israel doesn't need the West's permission to save itself. It's still worth reflecting on why, singularly, among nations, Israel's right to fight for its survival is widely disputed. The Biden administration has commendably resisted the clamor from the increasingly strident anti-Israel wing of the Democratic Party to ostracize the Jewish state. But it's a mark of the power of that wing that the president feels obliged to balance his support with a rhetorical campaign of increasingly shrill, daily denunciations of Israel's efforts in Gaza. Israel has a right to defend itself, he seems to be saying, but it should stop the war now. Baker backs up his thesis with examples. He writes, Mr. Biden expressed this dichotomous position in his State of the Union address last week. He was at it again over the weekend when he told MSNBC that the offensive in Gaza was, quote, hurting Israel more than helping Israel. It's contrary to what Israel stands for, and I think it's a big mistake. And then Baker takes it a step further and quotes from the UN Secretary General, demonstrating just how far-fetched calls for ceasefire are. He continues, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, called for a ceasefire on October 18th in response to false stories about Israeli airstrikes. Mr. Guterres later blamed Israel in part for attacks on its citizens, saying that they didn't, quote, happen in a vacuum, unquote. Relentless media efforts to besmirch Israel produced a flowering of the familiar statements from leaders about restraint and proportionate action. Even after the horrors of October 7th, Israel is tagged as the aggressor. Baker explains that civilian deaths are a necessary part of fighting Hamas because, as we all know, Hamas is embedded in the civilian population. He writes, but in the process of extirpating Hamas, it was inevitable civilians would be killed. This wasn't simply because there is collateral damage in any large-scale warfare, but because Hamas intended it that way. To the terror group, the propaganda value of a dead Palestinian child is as great as that of an Israeli. Now Baker quotes a great essay by statistics professor Abraham Weiner, who proved that Hamas's numbers are totally fake. Here's how it goes. An intriguing statistical analysis by Abraham Weiner in Tablet magazine last week scrutinized the number published by Hamas and noted several statistical oddities, including an impossibly steady and consistent increase in dead day by day, and curiously tiny number of civilian men among the casualties. Taken together, Hamas is reporting not only that 70% of the casualties are women and children, but also that 20% are fighters. He notes, this is not possible unless Israel somehow is not killing non-combatant men, or else Hamas is claiming that almost all the men in Gaza are Hamas fighters. There is something that I've been talking about since the beginning of war. I'm glad to see that now someone's getting serious, and this issue is getting serious attention. The numbers are just fake. I've been saying that from the beginning, not only by me. If the actual number killed is somewhere below 30,000, and Israel has killed somewhere close to 12,000 fighters it claims to have killed, then the rough ratio of combatants to non-combatants killed is around 1-to-1. This is really remarkable. 1-to-1 is an unbelievably low number. In the other urban battles, the numbers are considered good when it's 1-to-6. Usually that number is over 1-to-10. That would come to civilians for every Hamas terrorist. Israel is killing far, far fewer civilians in Gaza than ever believed to be possible. Baker concludes by writing and asking why the double standard and why Jews are not permitted to defend themselves. He put it this way: why does Israel always seem to be held to a different standard? To see the answer, to understand why Israel usually portrayed as the bloodlusting warmonger, it might be helpful to reframe our original question. Instead of asking what Israel has to do to be allowed to defend itself, we might ask, what do the Jews have to do to be allowed to defend themselves? These are great questions. Unfortunately, Baker does not give us any answers. Next up is a column by Ian Kingsbury. It too was published in the Wall Street Journal and first appeared on March 7th, 2024. The column is entitled, Israel Takes the E Out of DEI, subtitled, Jews and Arabs alike reject the ideology sweeping the West. This is a very interesting column that shows how Israel embraces diversity and inclusion, but not equity, and that Israel rewards promotion through excellence. This is how Kingsbury begins. The ideology of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a direct threat to Israel's existence. That's what I learned from Jewish and Arab Israelis during my 5 days in the country in February. They didn't only say that DEI goes hand in hand with anti-Semitism, which it does. They also said it sacrifices the merit that has helped Israel survive in a sea of hostility. I traveled to Israel on the solidarity trip organized by the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine. Several professors wanted to support Israel while registering their displeasure with the higher education's largely anti-Semitic response to Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack. I joined their invitation, hoping to learn how Israel approaches the DEI ideology that has swept the Western world. I quickly noticed that Israelis talk about DEI differently, most notably by excluding and redefining the E. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem is committed to diversity and inclusion. Ditto, the Israel Institute of Technology, or the Technion. Tel Aviv University keeps the E, but instead of equity emphasizes equality and diversity. The president of the Technion disavowed DEI, telling me that it is an unacceptable answer to the question he asks himself every morning: is our work in the interest of Israeli society and Israeli security? Instead of lowering standards in pursuit of equity, Technion is reaching out to Arab communities to find more qualified students. Its efforts have increased the number of Arab undergraduate students by about 80%, from 500 in 2020 to more than 900 in 2023, while the dropout rate has decreased. The author now offers readers the example of a DEI specialist at the Hebrew University. He writes, "At the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I asked an Arab woman who works as diversity equity official how her institution understands the topic. She said her school demands equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. The latter, she said, would pit people against each other, deepening divides that Israel has worked hard to close." Micah Halpern, Director General of the Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa, made a similar point. He told us that people get promotions into their position according to their abilities, not about their religion, not about their gender, not about anything else. It works. Mr. Halpern said that it is the only hospital in the Middle East where an Arab woman heads the nephrology or kidney disease unit. After October 7th, the hospital's Arab employees showed up en masse to treat the expected influx of patients. The hospital's focus on diversity and inclusion rather than equity appears to have united its workforce. This column concludes with a quote from a military briefing at an Air Force base. And the quote ends with a bit of mussar, a bit of an important lesson for life and success delivered by a lieutenant colonel. Kingsbury writes, "The most telling comment came from a lieutenant colonel who briefed us at the Nevatim Air Base, a focal point of the country's military response to Hamas. I asked if the Israeli Air Force has any initiatives to increase diversity in its ranks. The officer chuckled, then said that while there are efforts to recruit a broad swath of Israeli citizens, assignments and promotions are based on ability. A person has to earn the pilot seat in an F-35, because when Israel is at war, Israel must win. It can't afford to embrace such a divisive and destructive ideology. Neither can the United States, the leader of the free world." Well said, I would say. Well said. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 4 cartoons today, and 1 meme. First up is a cartoon about U.S. policy regarding Israel and Hamas. President Joe Biden has crashed his little blue car into a street sign, and the street sign has arrows, 2 arrows, one pointing in one direction, one in the other, one in the direction of Israel, the other in the direction of Hamas. This cartoonist is warning the President of the United States not to be even-handed. Make a decision. Next up is a Ramadan and fasting cartoon. We see these all over because it's Ramadan. A baby is sitting and playing in Gaza. The caption reads, "Muslims begin the holy month of Ramadan, which is observed by dawn to dusk fasting. The baby looks down at an empty pot and says, 'I'm way ahead of you.'" Next up is a meme. This sentiment in this meme has been spreading since the explosion of liberal support for Hamas on October 7th, where we've seen posters that read, "Rape is resistance," and groups like Queers for Palestine. In this meme, 2 Muslim men are speaking to an obviously Western woman who has extended her arm to shake hands with them. The men tell her, "Oh, we don't shake hands with women. It's haram," forbidden in Arabic. "But if we conquered your lands, we can take you as a sex slave." She responds, "It's nice to meet you guys." That's funny. This next cartoon has 4 frames. In 3 frames, we see many rockets launched by Hamas into Israel. In the final frame, Israel retaliates with a single rocket, and the media proclaims Israel attacked Gaza today. No coverage of the other attacks. Hamas can attack Israel, and no one says anything. Finally, in this last cartoon, a U.S. naval ship is launching 3 missiles. The ship's commander says, this one is to deter the Houthis. Next, he says, this one is to de-escalate. And finally, he says on the 3rd rocket, this one is to reduce tensions. That's hilarious. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. IDF spokesperson stated that engineering forces from Division 162 destroyed a significant underground route with more than 2.5 kilometers long in the northern Gaza Strip. He said the forces are clearing the way for the infantry soldiers and armed tanks while exposing the area. The destroyed route is the longest located in the north of the Gaza Strip, connecting the north and the south of the Strip. Also, a tunnel 7.5 miles long was also destroyed recently. Marwan Issa, deputy to Hamas's supreme military commander, Mohammed Deif, was injured in a recent IDF strike on central Gaza's Nusayrat. But his fate remains unclear. According to the London-based newspaper Ashraq al-Awsat, which cited the Palestinian sources familiar with the matter, later security sources informed Israel's cabinet ministers that evidence was mounting suggesting that Issa was indeed killed. Despite all the varied attempts to safely get food and aid to Gazans, no one method has yet to be found to be successful. For example, Palestinian media reported that one person was crushed to death and others were injured in the city of Beit Lahia in the northern part of Gaza as a result of a stampede of crowds while waiting for air delivery and humanitarian aid. The IDF Shin Bet and the border police forces arrested 7 Palestinians and seized weapons recently in a series of counter-terrorism operations across the West Bank. Since the war's outset, approximately 3,500, nearly 4,000 suspects have been detained across the territory, including over 1,500 affiliated with the terrorist organization Hamas. The IDF spokesman stated that fighter jets attacked Hezbollah targets in Lebanon in 4 areas at the very same time. According to the IDF, among the targets attacked were Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure and observation posts in the Eitronun area, a military building in the area, as well as a series of observation posts in Marwin and Aita Ash-Shab areas. Israel also struck Hezbollah sites in Yabrud, in the rural area of Damascus, just outside of Damascus, according to the Kol Habira website, which is affiliated with the Syrian opposition groups. The list goes on and on. According to IDF reports, Israeli air defenses intercepted a suspicious target off the coast of the northern city of Akko, or Accra. No alerts were activated. And then, according to the IDF reports, a suspicious aerial target crossed into Israeli territory from the Red Sea and fell in an open area north of the city of Eilat. Israeli Air Force forces monitored the target. No damage was caused and no injuries reported. The Houthis of Yemen continued to taunt the U.S. and Israel. They're not just attacking ships and tankers and military vessels, they're also launching missiles, rockets, and attack drones toward Israel to attack Israeli cities. Recently, the IDF made public a series of missions that the Israeli stealth F-35 embarked on. The F-35 cannot be detected on radar, and it has flown missions even inside of Iran. But the real coup is that an Israeli F-35 pilot named Colonel M shot down a cruise missile shot by the Houthis on its way to Israel's southern city of Eilat. A cruise missile is a smart bomb. This was the first time in history that a fighter jet was able to intercept a cruise missile. Colonel M, just his initial of his first name, was very proud because the missile could have hit a hotel where evacuees from the communities that bordered Gaza were moved to for their safety. He explained that his F-35 could be over the Red Sea at one moment and turn and fly to Lebanon to hit targets of Hezbollah over there. U.S. Congress has ordered 3 Ivy League universities, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and Columbia, to disclose all Qatari donations they have received since January 2021. These subpoenas were handed down against the backdrop of criticism of Qatari influence on these universities and the increase in anti-Semitism on their campuses. Chairman of the Labor and Welfare Committee of the House of Representatives, Virginia Foxx, said that the goal is to, quote, to distinguish between what is innocent and what is bleeding into the campuses. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We all know that the Purim season is upon us. But did you know that the Jewish holiday of Purim keeps us honest? There are many lessons to be learned from Purim. One of those lessons is the importance of laughter in our lives. On Purim, we laugh. On Purim, we kid around. On Purim, no one is spared. Being able to take a joke and laugh at ourselves and at different situations is important. It's a Jewish lesson we learn from Purim. Sometimes we might even call it black humor. On Purim, those many years ago, people of Shushan and Persia were saved. Just as they were saved many years ago, other Jews have been saved over various years in various situations. Many of those families have handed down the tradition of a private Purim or a community Purim. Private Purims occur in communities and families who were saved at the last minute, commit to an annual fasting, and then celebrate on the anniversary of their private miracle, their family miracle, their community miracle. They are remembering that they could have died, but were saved. Some communities like Hebron, and Alexandria even have multiple community Purims because they were saved multiple times at the last minute. I know members of the Heller family who to this day celebrate the day in the year 1629 when their relative, Yom Tov Lippman Heller, was released from prison. He was arrested by the Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand II, and sentenced to death for insulting Christianity, and then freed. There are literally hundreds of these stories. The point is that we remember. The story of Purim is about fun, it's about celebration, and about remembering. And I want to wish you all a very happy Purim. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.